Welcome everyone to Ein Sof Learning. Today we're going to go over some of the vocabulary terms that are used in the wisdom of Kabbalah, specifically in Talmud Eser Sefirot, the teaching of the 10 luminous emanations by Rav Yehuda Ashlag, one of the most famous Kabbalists of the last 100 years, who wrote a commentary on the Etz Chaim, the Tree of Life, written by Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was the main student of the Arizal. And we know that the teachings of Rabbi Chaim Vital were all from the Ari. So we need to know what the Ari is talking about, because it's not really understandable. If you just open up the Etz Chaim, the Tree of Life, written by the Ari, and you just read it without the commentary, you're not going to understand what it's really trying to say, because it's a very, very difficult to understand. It's a very spiritual and deep subject. So we need the commentaries written by Rav Ashlag in Talmud Eser Sefirot, again, the teaching of the 10 luminous emanations, the 10 Sefirot, in order to understand the words of the Ari. So let's just read one small passage, the first paragraph actually, the opening paragraph of the Etz Chaim, of the Tree of Life, written by the Ari. And we're going to define the terms, not go through the concepts and understand everything, but just understand the definitions of the Hebrew words in their context. So it says, know that before the Ne'etzalim were emanated, and the creatures created, an upper simple or had filled the entire reality. There was no vacant place, such as an empty avir, and a halal, but everything was filled with that simple, boundless or. It did not have a bechina of rosh, or sof, but it was all one simple or, completely even, called or Ein Sof. So there were a bunch of Hebrew terms there, so we're going to define the Hebrew terms. Again, know that before the Ne'etzalim were emanated. What is a Ne'etzal? Ne'etzal means emanated. Something that has been emanated. And then it says, and the creatures created. So what's the difference between something that's been emanated and created? Again, creature means creature. It was created. It's made by the word create, bria. In Hebrew, there's a difference between emanation and creation. That's why it says that before the ne'etzalim, before the emanated, were emanated, and the creatures created, meaning the created things created. So these two levels of existence correspond to Olam Atzilut and Olam Bria. Two out of the 5 spiritual worlds that exist. Atzilut means the world of emanation, and Bria is the world of creation. So it's saying before the world of creation and before the world of Atzilut, which is the world of emanation, now we know what Ne'etzal means. Ne'etzal means an emanated thing, something that exists in the Olam of Atzilut. So before the Ne'etzalim were emanated and the creatures created, an upper simple or had filled the entire reality. What is or? The concept of or can be understood as light. Light, like you have a light bulb or the sun emanates light, it lights up the whole room. That's called or. But it's not talking about a physical or that we understand. Again, those examples I just gave, the sun and the light bulb, are physical concepts that help us somewhat understand what the Kabbalists are trying to say, why they choose the word or to describe this energy, right? But you can think of it as energy as well. It's the energy that filled up the entire reality. It says that an upper simple or, an upper simple light or energy, had filled the entire reality. So it becomes apparent here that the only thing that existed before the emanated were emanated and before the creatures were created was this upper simple light, this energy, this mystical, spiritual substance that had filled the entire reality. Okay? Why did they choose the analogy of light to describe this energy? You might have heard of this concept of enlightenment or illumination, right? Why? Or even if you hear the Illuminati, they're called the Illuminati, like illumination, like a light. The concept of, whenever you get an idea. When you get an idea, a light bulb goes off. Why do we use the analogy of a light bulb? The concept of light, this analogy of light, is very prevalent among scholars and people who are very wise and holy, and we hear it in different traditions like Aristotle, right? We see the light. Or when someone passes away after 120 years, I saw the light. I see a light at the end of the tunnel. What is this light? What is light? So obviously it's not talking about a physical light, like I explained earlier, but we can learn from physical light what it's trying to say. Because whenever you enter a dark room and you turn on the lights in the room, what happens to the darkness? It disappears. What happens to the light? It fills up the entire room, right? Depending on how bright it is. But let's say it's bright enough, it's going to fill up the entire room. Even a small candle can light up a very, very dark space and allow you to see. So you see that light is very strong, it's a very powerful force in the face of darkness. Even a little bit of light can allow you to see and navigate through a dark room. So the concept of light is something that just fills up a vessel. It fills up its container. Again, if you put a light bulb in a room, it just fills up the room. So light fulfills. Light fulfills. That's a very important thing to take away. This is a very strong reason as to why the word or, the word light, is used in Kabbalistic terminology and in a lot of different spiritual traditions to describe the concept of enlightenment or the concept of godly energy. So this light had filled the entire reality. There was no vacant place such as an empty avir and a halal. So the concept of avir and the concept of halal, they're Hebrew words that describe two different types of lack, two different types of absence. Avir means air, but it says there was no empty avir. That means there was no empty air. So the concept of air in Kabbalah is actually a code word for a specific type of lack. I'm not going to get into the details of it. Actually, maybe I'll get into a little bit of it. A cup is a container, but if you put water, if you fulfill it with some liquid, the liquid aspect, the internal aspect, is like the light, and the vessel is the container, right? So avir is a term that's used to describe the vessel, okay? There's two types of entities here. There's the fulfillment, and then there's the vessel. The fulfillment, they call it or chokhmah. Again, or means light, but chokhmah means wisdom. So or chokhmah is the internal aspect of a spiritual system, meaning the fulfillment of the vessel. But then there's another entity, which we called the vessel. We said the cup itself is the container, right? That's called or chasadim. Chasadim means kindness, the light of kindness, or mercy if you want. The light of mercy. So this vessel has a different nature than the fulfillment of the vessel. The vessel itself has a desire to receive, it has a pull force, while the light or the fulfillment, the or chokhmah, the internal aspect, has the desire to bestow. It has a push force. So these are two opposing forces, two opposing energies. Or chokhmah being the giving force, and or chasadim being the receiving force. That means that the light and the vessel. So again, whenever it says that there was no vacant place, such as an empty avir, the avir it's referring to, avir means air, remember. The word air in Kabbalah is actually a code word for or chasadim, meaning the vessel. But whenever it says empty avir, when it says empty air, it means that this vessel is empty. It doesn't have the or chokhmah. So we refer to avir as the vessel. Whenever there's light in the vessel, we call it avir. We call the vessel avir. But when there's no light in the vessel, when there's no or chokhmah, and it's just or chasadim, we call it empty avir, meaning empty air. That's a code word for or chasadim that's lacking or chokhmah. So hopefully I made that clear. And the halal, and there was no halal. That's the second term. What's a halal? Halal means vacuum. Literally, it means empty space, some sort of absence, like a black hole. There was no absence. There was no lack. So there was no empty avir, empty air, and there was no halal, meaning there was no empty space. But everything was filled with that simple, boundless or. But everything was filled with this light. Remember that light we were talking about earlier? Not the or chokhmah or the or chasadim. That was just in response to what avir means, what we're talking about, air. But whenever we say the simple light that filled the entire reality, remember we said before everything existed, before the emanated, before the created, there was an upper simple light that filled the entire reality. So it's saying that everything was filled. There was no lack. There was no avir. There was no empty avir, or a halal. Everything was filled with this light. There was no vacancy anywhere. The Ari continues. It did not have a bechina of Rosh or Sof. What's a bechina of Rosh? First, what does bechina mean? Bechina means feature or aspect. And Rosh means head or beginning. And Sof means tail or end. So again, let's read it again. It did not have a bechina of Rosh. That means it did not have a feature of a head / beginning. It did not have a beginning. Or Sof, or end. So there was no beginning and there was no end. This light that filled the entire reality had no beginning and no end, meaning it was eternal. It's always existed, not bound by time. But it was all one simple light, completely even, called Or Ein Sof. What is Or Ein Sof? Or Ein Sof means, again, let's break it down. We said Or means light. The word Ein means no. Or without Sof, without end. Endless light. Remember that light we were talking about? Its name is Or Ein Sof. It means endless light. Or if you want to do it literally, light without end. So what is Or Ein Sof? What is that? Or Ein Sof, which we just tried to describe by using the analogy of physical light. We said that when you turn on the lights in a dark room, it fills up the entire room, right? It fulfills the entire space with this bright light. But what is in the spiritual context when we're talking about Or Ein Sof, when we're talking about in a spirituality? What is that? First of all, I'm going to give you the simple explanation. It's the light of God. When we say God, I'm not talking about this old man in the sky with a long beard looking down and punishing people for sinning and rewarding people for doing good deeds. That's not God. That's a very childish view and a very elementary perspective on mysticism. I mean, on spirituality. Even in religious texts, we know that the stories in these religious texts are deeper than they appear on the surface. When it says God got angry or God got happy, right? God doesn't have emotions. He's not a human. But we try and portray a spiritual concept through a language that we can understand. That's why it sounds sometimes like we're personifying the spiritual. We're personifying God. But God is not even what God is. G-O-D is a made-up English word to describe this entity. The word has been corrupted. I don't call Ein Sof God. I call him Ein Sof. That's the name for God in the Kabbalistic terminology. In Hebrew, we call God Ein Sof, the endless. Because there's only one thing that we know about God, and that's that he has no end, no frame, no boundary, no vessel, no limits. Nothing is impossible for Ein Sof. Nothing is impossible for God. So that's the one thing that we know about him. Ein Sof. He's Ein Sof. He's endless. So, Or Ein Sof is the light of Ein Sof. If Ein Sof refers to God, then Or Ein Sof refers to the light of God. There's a difference between the light of God and God. If you want to talk about it from the perspective of the sun, right? There's a nice example in nature that we can understand it. It's the sun and the rays of the sun. The sun is not equal to the rays of the sun. Instead, the sun emanates light. It emanates heat. It emanates vitamin D. It's not equal to those things that it produces. It produces light, right? So that's a very important distinction. The sun is not the light of the sun. The sun is whatever the sun is in its essence, and what we see from our perspective on earth is a shining bulb of hot rays and heat. But that's what we perceive. That's how we connect to the sun. But we're not really connecting to the sun. We're connecting to the rays of the sun, the heat, the light, the vitamins. That is all effects of the sun, but it's not the actual sun. That's important to make a distinction, because so too with God, we don't connect to Ein Sof. We can't connect to Ein Sof. Ein Sof is the essence of God. Again, we don't connect to God himself. If we did, then the statement that we cannot see God's face would be false. But we can't see God's face because we can't connect to Ein Sof. We can't connect to the essence of God. However, we can connect according to our level, according to our ability. But there's no levels in Ein Sof. But there's levels to the light. That's why the light of the sun comes in the form of a line, comes in rays, because there's a beginning and an end. A ray, a line, has a beginning and an end. But the sun itself, it's a circle. A circle doesn't have any starting point or any finishing point. It's a circular. So there's two different types of consciousness, two different types of existence. Circular and linear. But that's besides the point. So Or Ein Sof is the light of God. That is the way that we relate to God. But in truth, in Ein Sof, there is nothing that exists besides Ein Sof, which means God. From the POV of God, there is nothing but God. From the perspective of the creation, the way we relate to Ein Sof is through the light that we perceive. So good. Let me just do a quick recap. A ne'etzal is an emanated thing. It's something different than a created thing. Remember, Atzilut is the world of emanation. Bria is the world of creation. So the things that were emanated are different than the things that were created. And then there was an upper simple Or. Or means light. And we said why we call it light. Very simply is because that's the force, that's the energy that fulfills a vessel. Right? It fulfills a vessel and it gets rid of the darkness. It diminishes the darkness. Next, there was no empty avir. Avir means air. It's a code word for Or Chasadim, which is the vessel aspect of a spiritual system, the receiving force, the pull, right? But whenever this vessel is empty of Or Chokhmah, meaning light or fulfillment, when it's empty of internal aspect, then it's called the empty avir. It's called the empty air, which means that the Or Chasadim is missing or lacking the Or Chokhmah, which is the internal fulfillment. And the Halal, there was no Halal, which means that there was no empty space or a vacuum. And again, this is referencing before the emanated were emanated and before the creatures were created. It's not saying right now. Right now we're living in the world of illusion. Right now we're living in the world of falsehood. There is lack. There is empty space from our POV. But it's saying that before the world was created, that there was no lack. The truth is that there was and is really, even now, but from our POV we can't see it, but even now, there is no lack. There was no empty avir. There was no halal. But everything was filled with the simple, boundless Or. It didn't have a bechina of Rosh. Remember, bechina means feature. Rosh means head or beginning. So there was no beginning. Or Sof. And Sof, remember, means tail or end. So there was no Rosh or Sof. No beginning or end to this Or, to this light. But it was all one. Simple Or, simple light, completely even, called Or Ein Sof. Again, Or Ein Sof is the light of Ein Sof. Ein Sof is the word that we use to describe God, but Or Ein Sof is a word that we use to describe the light of God, which is how the creation relates to God. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you gained something and were able to understand in a deeper sense what the Arizal is trying to tell us whenever he talks about this light that existed before all existence, right? I mean, how can you say that there was an existence before all existence, right? The light is an existence, so how does that exist before there was emanated and created beings? I mean, so we're going to talk about that in the next video. How it's possible for there to be something, aka Or Ein Sof, before everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.